You were in Afghanistan in 2002, and you were called into a very remote section of Afghanistan because a patrol had basically gone missing.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Well, just around nothing.
For miles.
Right.
So very remote.
Yeah, very remote. So we flew in. Did about 4 kilometers. We're hiking through the same area where they were supposed to make one of their checkpoints, one of their rally points. And before we left, there was all kinds of what happened with the ambush. That was even odd because at point of ambush, you would call for maybe close air support, something, okay? There was no calls made, just off the grid. So we're coming down a mountainside, and there was a nice path, goat path. As we bent around this corner, you could see this opening of the cave. There's a cave as we're coming around. And then I see there's a lot of rocks, which is another oddity, and then bone matter. When I'm not close enough to identify what kind of bones, but I did see something I knew was a piece of our communications equipment. So instantly, we're thinking ambush, maybe animal, it could be anything. And there was enough room in front of this cave, but it had a sheer drop-off. But there was enough room that we actually got into a decent dispersal in case of ambush.
You see something coming out of the cave, and it's moving with a speed and agility that catches you off guard.
Everybody. And he comes out. It was a man at least 12 to 15 feet in height. This is a monster. Red beard, then his hair was longish, past the shoulder, a scarlet red, and Dan runs at him and starts shooting, which broke all of us into the reality. Because it was so surreal.
Now your training is kicking in.
Oh yeah,
okay.
Muscle memory, complete muscle memory. You gotta remember, Chinooks could only go in certain places because they had enough lift. Mm-hmm. And so we got him on there. The thing was too big, we couldn't move it. It smelled worse than a skunk. A corpse that's been around for a while.
Really fell.
Oh, it was like a combination because of the, how do you put that, the persistence of a skunk smell. But once the helicopter came in, dropped its little hook, and off he goes. The communication was sent out. We had a very large, possible human creature.
There you are in the hills of Afghanistan. How many troop members are you with?
We had 6 on my crew, and when we say hills of Afghanistan, for us, we did not fly into the wilderness. We actually flew into a base. I guess this thing was transloaded out of the mountains by a CH-47. But I could see that it did have the 6 fingers. I remember taking my foot up and placing it up next to its foot, and it was extremely large. We estimated at about 12 feet, give or take. What I can tell you is the weight of the thing. Basically, it was approximately 1,500 pounds when it was getting on the aircraft. Now, if you take away the pallet weight and all the rigging that we had to hold this thing down, we figured it was around 1,100 pounds.
Of course we're upset. That's a given, okay? We lost a very good guy. But add to that, you're discussing something that even in our after-action report, they're saying rewrite it. And we had to rewrite it the way they wanted.
How many fingers?
6 toes. And the nails were weird because if you see somebody that ever has, I don't know what it's called, but it's
like a fungus on
the nails, how they get pointy and they're like gnarly, that's what they look like.
As we showed you in the clip, the radio operator checked in and gave the report, and the unit was told to stand by as Central Command was about to dispatch 2 helicopters to them. They were told that the Giant would be loaded on one of the choppers, and then they would follow in the other chopper for debriefing. The shooter told us that when the chopper landed, they loaded the Giant into a very large cargo net. The first chopper towing a Giant left, and then they boarded the second helicopter and followed. When they returned to their base in the Kandahar province in Afghanistan, they were debriefed and told to keep all of this under wraps. They were forced to sign a non-disclosure agreement, which essentially would prohibit them from talking about this to anyone. It is with great reluctance on the shooter's part that he has come forward. He believes that people have the right to know what is going on this planet, that the supernatural is real, and that the startling and unsettling fact that a remnant of a legendary Nephilim are still on the earth may be true. While the shooter's story is certainly fantastic, it does corroborate Stephen Quayle's account that he published years before. And people have a right to know about this stuff. I mean, if there are 15-footers or 18-footers roaming the planet and our military has brought them down, I mean, we have a right as American citizens. I mean, this isn't classified military stuff. This is something that we need to know, and it points back to the biblical prophetic narrative. What are your thoughts on that?
I think, here's my personal opinion. My personal opinion is if it points that the Bible is accurate, they don't want it. If it goes against Darwinian evolution, it's not to be spoken of.
So you're out in the boonies running around looking for high-value targets?
Correct. Okay. And we're doing those operations, and as we're getting into firefights, we're getting into different scrimmages, you want to put it that way, we would come back to the base and we started hearing this rumor about a unit that killed this, what they started calling this really tall person. At first I didn't think anything of it, and then come to find out that the person that they killed actually was 3 times the size of a man, had extra digits on their hand and digits on their feet, and had red hair, and a special unit had come in and wanted this target. Well, we'd heard that they had killed this thing inside a cave, or the mouth of a cave, and it was common knowledge among the military to hear this.
Now when you say common knowledge, what do you mean? I mean, how does that work?
Years later, to come to find out, when I had returned from Afghanistan and had met other military members that had not been there in the operations with me, if you would bring up the Giant of Kandahar, they knew about it. When you first hear it, you're thinking like, this has got to be a joke, this has got to be a hoax. But then after things go down a certain way and you keep hearing it, you start to realize it's not a joke. They kept telling us to keep our weapons high, which means normally it's 2 to the chest, 1 to the head, but they kept telling us to put it towards a man's head and put it higher. So we would question, why do they want us to shoot higher than a man's head?
That's bizarre.
It is.
Our contact said 2002 is when they shot this 15-footer or taller, and you're now in this, you know, in the service around 2005. This word has gotten out, and what I find interesting here too is that if you're going to create a hoax, I get that, but you got details: 6 fingers, red hair, double rows of teeth, 6 digits on the toes, and of course that brings it right back into what we hear about in the biblical prophetic narrative, specifically the Nephilim. Your thoughts?
I agree. I would tell you that when I was doing my time in the service, and the stuff I saw, some of it I couldn't explain, like lights in the sky during firefights, like orbs, or lights that be the size of a softball that look that size looking up in the sky but making weird noises. And even going to Iraq myself and being near Haditha Dam and seeing the prisoners underneath the dam, and the prisoners would scream and there'd be this awful feeling underneath the dam, and then later finding out in the Bible that angels locked underneath there where it talks about.
And this Haditha Dam is the Euphrates.
Is Euphrates,
and there's
correct.
an angel supposedly locked underneath the Euphrates,
correct,
which is released in the book of Revelation.
Correct.
That's bizarre. So you're actually at this site, and soldiers are being locked in prison underneath the Haditha Dam.
Correct.
And they're freaking out.
They were freaking out. They said they could feel it. In fact, the people who would guard them they would draw straws to see who would actually take them.
No one wanted to go down.
Nobody wants to go down. Going back to Afghanistan, we would hear these things. We would hear the locals talk about rumors of these giants.
What would the locals say? How would they talk about it?
They say that they lived in the caves and they would eat people. And
they were cannibals.
They were cannibals. And we, at the time, chalked it up to our United States' Bigfoot.
In early 1959, a group of hikers decided to head out on an expedition across a mountainous region of Western Soviet Union. The group consisted of 9 experienced men and women greatly familiar with the Siberian wilderness. Yet, this adventure would prove to be their last. Despite a criminal investigation, photographs and journal entries, the case remains unsolved after more than half a century. This is the case of Dyatlov Pass. In the early morning of January the 23rd, 1959, a ski and hiking team of 10 boarded a train headed for the Ural Mountains in the middle of the Soviet Union. The group consisted of 8 men and 2 women, with Igor Dyatlov as the group's leader. As the train slowly advanced deep into the mountainous Siberian taiga, the group diary received a final entry. I wonder what awaits us on this hike. Will anything new happen? Over the next few days, the group continued to alternate between modes of transportation. First a bus, then a truck, then a horse and sleigh, and eventually they proceed on foot and skis. On January the 28th, one of the hikers named Yuri Yudin had begun to feel quite ill and eventually decided to head back, while the remaining group of 9 continued as planned. These photos were taken just before they parted ways, and it would be the last time he saw his friends alive. The group resumed their expedition across the snow-covered outback and documented everything of note using diaries as well as multiple cameras. Recovered photos and journal entries suggest that the trek progressed as one would expect, with no unforeseen complications. Just lots of snow, bitter cold, and an increasingly arduous landscape. On February the 1st, they reached the foot of a mountain known to the indigenous Mansi population as Dead Mountain. They spend the better part of the day progressing up the slope and eventually decide to set up camp only a few hundred meters from the peak. These are some of the last photos recovered from the cameras, and the last sentence of the final entry reads, "It is difficult to imagine such a comfort on the ridge, with shrill, howling wind hundreds of kilometers away from human settlements." A few weeks later, friends and relatives begin to worry. No one has heard from Igor or any of the other members of the group. After much debate, a team of volunteers eventually head out to find them. On February the 26th, the search party is finally able to locate the camp on the slope. It's obvious to the first at the scene that something has gone horribly wrong. The tent is in scrambles, covered by a thin coat of snow. The hikers' belongings and equipment was found orderly placed inside the tent, but the tent itself had been slashed open with a knife from the inside. The next day, 9 pairs of footprints lead the search volunteers down the slope towards the nearby woods. Given that the footprints left rather mild indentations in the snow, would suggest that they descended the slope in a rather calm and orderly fashion, as opposed to running away in panic. The footprints could be tracked for about half a kilometer from the tent until the trail was completely covered by snow. So they continued in the direction of the trail and under a large cedar tree at the edge of the forest, next to the remains of an improvised campfire, they found the frozen bodies of Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonoshenko. It would take over 2 months for the bodies of all 9 hikers to be recovered. The first 2 were found severely underdressed. No jackets, no pants, no gloves, hats, boots, or anything else one might expect given the frigid climate. Only light shirts, underpants, and socks. At the time of their death, it would have been around 30 degrees below zero. The cedar tree had signs of damage, as if someone had climbed it, with branches broken up to 5 meters high. Perhaps they were attempting to locate a tent in the pitch-black darkness, or perhaps they were trying to hide from someone or something. The next 3 hikers were found at varying distances between the tent and the tree, covered by a few centimeters of snow. They were better dressed than the previous 2, but not by much, as they still lacked essential items such as boots, hats, and gloves. They were all found facing the direction of the tent as if they were struggling to return at the moment of death. While some of them had sustained minor injuries, all 5 had died of hypothermia. It should also be noted that 4 of them had died while intoxicated. The last 4 hikers were found at the bottom of a small hill covered by 3 meters of snow, 75 meters from the tree in the opposite direction of the tent. 3 of them had sustained lethal injuries. 1 had a fractured skull and 2 had fractured multiple ribs and suffered massive internal bleeding. The medical examiner believed the injuries had been sustained from a fall and compared it to a car crash. The injuries had been sustained while they were all alive and could not have been inflicted by another person. 2 had also been found with gaping eye sockets, and 1 of the women had a missing tongue. The last of the 4 had a broken nose and a deformed neck, but died of hypothermia. The most mysterious of all, 3 articles of clothing were later found to be abnormally radioactive. On May the 28th, the criminal case was discontinued with a cryptic and incredibly vague conclusion. The lead investigator writes in the final report, "The cause of death was an unknown compelling force which the hikers were unable to overcome." Not exactly the most satisfying answer and barely a conclusion at all. So, just in case the Galactic Empire had nothing to do with the death of the hikers, is it possible to explain some of the more enigmatic details in a less vague yet credible fashion? Let's give it a shot. The fact that Dubinina was missing her tongue has been taken way out of proportion. Some say that it was cut off or ripped out while she was still alive. Others say it was eaten by scavengers after death, while some even claim the tongue was later found somewhere else. But I've read the medical reports and this is what it says. The diaphragm of the mouth and the tongue is missing. That's it. There's nothing about cutting or ripping or anything. I don't know how or where it began, but there seems to be an exaggerated importance placed on this missing tongue, while in reality it's a rather minor detail. At least the medical examiner believed it to be a minor detail, otherwise he would likely have elaborated further. For example, the same section of the same report states, "Gaping orbits, the eyeballs are absent." Equally mysterious, right? Well, no, because the medical examiner does provide an explanation for both. Soft tissue injuries to the head are post-mortem changes to Dubinina's corpse, which was recently exposed to water prior to detection. He even adds putrefaction and decomposition in parentheses to clarify exactly what it means. And this was not even exclusive to Dubinina, as the 4 last bodies were all damaged due to the melting snow. Now, some who claim that her tongue must have been removed while she was still alive have pointed to the fact that she had about 100 grams of blood in her stomach. But that's not exactly true either. The relevant portion of the forensic examination reads, "The stomach contained up to 100 cubic centimeters of a dark red, slimy mass." That's about 10 centiliters of something, most likely food, mixed with something red, most likely blood. So we don't know how much blood was in her stomach, just that there was blood in her stomach. Which isn't that strange given that she was suffering from massive internal bleeding. One of the most mysterious aspects of this case is that 3 separate articles of clothing discovered on 2 of the bodies were found to be radioactive. Which does indeed sound a bit mysterious, but you have to keep in mind that almost everything is slightly radioactive. So we need more details. The radiological studies claim that under normal circumstances, an area of 150 square centimeters should not exceed 5,000 disintegrations per minute. Only 3 articles of clothing exceeded or equaled that limit at 5,000 dpm, 5,600 dpm, and 9,900 dpm. The only explanation given in the report is that the clothes were contaminated as radioactive dust fell from the atmosphere, or the clothes were susceptible to contamination when in contact with radioactive substances. In other words, they were unable to determine exactly how the clothes were contaminated.
This had to have been manufactured by some kind of an advanced technology, and he didn't know what that would be either.
Linda Moulton Howe is sitting across a table from a man who served, and he is telling her that kilometers beneath the Antarctic ice, there is a chamber that holds a steady 68 to 72 degrees, while the surface outside sits below -40. He is not describing it the way you describe something terrifying. He is reading it off like a number from an instrument, flat, no fear, no thrill, which is somehow worse.
It was a lime green in color. The walls were lined with what I call hieroglyphics, but nothing of hieroglyphics that I've ever seen in my life.
Howe checked his record before he said a single word. And weeks later, a second man, who has never met the first, gives her the exact same temperature. The journalist. Howe never went looking for Antarctica. Antarctica came to her, the way the strange things always seem to. She was educated at Stanford University. She built documentaries about radiation exposure, environmental danger, public health threats, and she won several regional Emmy Awards doing it. She had a reputation for rigor long before any of this began. That matters here, because rigor is the only reason the rest of this is worth your time. She was not a person who chased lights in the sky. She was a person who checked things, and who had spent a career being trusted to check things. Then, in 1981, her documentary A Strange Harvest changed the direction of her career. In it, she investigated a wave of unexplained livestock deaths across Colorado, cases local authorities could not or would not explain. It was supposed to be a story about ranchers. It quietly turned into something else. That investigation pulled her toward people who claimed knowledge of classified military projects, people who started out as background and ended up being the story. Some of them were retired officials. Some of them began telling her things about Antarctica that ordinary people had never heard, and once she had heard them, she could not unhear them. For nearly 40 years, she pursued subjects most journalists deliberately stepped around, and the people who affected her most were not random callers. They were several former United States Navy SEALs. She examined their documents, she verified background details. She gathered what she could about the missions and locations they described, the dates, the units, the chain of how they came to be where they say they were. She has been blunt about why. If a man like that walks in and starts describing the impossible, you do not just listen. You find out first whether he is who he says he is. She did. They were. That groundwork is the only reason she did not wave them away when they started describing things that should not exist. One of those men sat with her and spoke for a long time without ever raising his voice. He did not perform. He did not reach for drama, and he did not pause for effect the way people do when they want to be believed. He folded his hands, looked somewhere past her shoulder, and walked through it like a debrief. He described an aircraft carrier, then helicopters to a remote base, then hours across the ice in specially built half-track vehicles, then a glacier with an octagon-shaped entrance hidden inside it. He gave her dimensions. He gave her temperatures. He named the kind of rock. He remembered the route the way a pilot remembers a cockpit, in the order you would actually move through it, never doubling back to correct himself. Howe has said the thing that stayed with her was not the content. It was the calm. People inventing a story get louder as it gets stranger. This man got quieter. And then, weeks or months later, someone with no connection to him, no overlapping unit, no shared command, no possible way to have rehearsed it together, gave her one of the same details. Not a vague echo, a specific number. She has described the feeling of hearing it the second time, the particular cold that goes through a person when a thing they had filed under one man's account suddenly has a witness. That was the moment the work stopped feeling like collecting stories and started feeling like assembling a single object out of pieces held by people who had never met. So, the question stops being whether one man remembered something strange. The question becomes how two strangers remembered the same impossible thing, down to the digits. The pattern. Here is what unsettled her. The people came from completely different places, different backgrounds, no apparent link to one another. A retired officer in one part of the country would give her a detail, and years later, someone with no connection to him would give her the same detail, unprompted, without knowing it had ever been said before. She kept files. She kept notes on who said what and when. And she could lay one man's account beside another's, 2 pages written years apart by strangers, and watch the same number appear in both.
Flight 370 disappeared on March 8th, 2014. On May 19th, about 9 weeks later, a leaked video was published to YouTube by a third party who claimed to have received it on March 12th. The video shows what appears to be a jet airliner on fire, being trailed by 3 spiraling orbs. Eventually, the 3 orbs change to a vertical pattern and disappear in a flash with the airliner, leaving a dead-end trail of smoke in the sky. A month later, on June 12th, a second video was published to the same channel that showed the exact same event taken from a different viewpoint. These videos have been deleted from YouTube, but can still be found on archive.org. Ashton Forbes and his team have been researching these videos extensively and have provided exhaustive evidence that these videos are legitimate, including digital forensics verified by CGI professionals, eyewitnesses, and government data. Forbes and his team have successfully addressed all debunker claims and have listed them for all to see on X.com at JustXAshton. So far, nobody has been able to debunk this research. Their research shows that the first leaked video was taken from a pair of American signals intelligence satellites known as USA-229, twin satellites capable of creating 3D stereoscopic images by capturing two slightly different views. The twin USA-229 satellites are logged at the exact location, time, and apparent angle required to have captured this video. This event occurred at around 2:30 in the morning. It was completely dark. The wavelengths captured by these cameras are for detail, and the stereoscopic effect allows for added depth perception. The source of the second video has been identified as an MQ-1C Gray Eagle unmanned combat drone with infrared and thermal technology. This video focuses on the heat signature, and the man responsible for leaking these videos seems to be Lieutenant Commander Edward Lin. He was accused of being a spy, but court transcripts prove that this was just spin. The details of his crimes, including the time they happened, are redacted, but it came out in the trial that the classified information in question was published on the internet, and Lieutenant Commander Edward Lin had full security clearance to the same technology used to capture these videos. Using Inmarsat's satellite ping data and military radar to track its path, and eyewitness testimony to verify it, Forbes put together the final flight path of Malaysian Airlines Flight 370. On March 7th at 1642 UTC, Flight 370 takes off from Kuala Lumpur International Airport. At 1721, the plane abruptly turns back towards the nearest airport in Penang. A witness on an oil rig reported that the plane was on fire. Several witnesses along the East Coast reported hearing a loud bang and seeing a glow coming from the plane as it passed overhead. At 1752, the co-pilot's mobile phone pings the local tower. At 1840, an eyewitness on a boat reported that the plane was glowing orange and appeared on fire. The Inmarsat ping data shows the same sharp left turn that we see in the videos, and then abruptly goes to zero as the plane disappears. The CCP released Chinese satellite images that appear to be 3 orbs. They first claimed it was debris and later said that releasing the image was a mistake. According to Chinese media, 19 families have signed a statement claiming they made calls that connected to missing passengers after the disappearance, but without an answer.